Good evening. It's the investigation that has dominated American politics for almost 2 years. Today, the full report into alleged Russian interference in the 2016 US presidential election has finally been released. The investigation was carried out by a former FBI director, Special Counsel Robert Mueller. His two questions: did President Trump collude with the Russian government? And did the president try to obstruct subsequent investigations into the affair? On conspiring with Russia, the answer was no. President Trump was cleared of that. But on the question of obstruction, the report did not reach a conclusion. Our North America editor, John Sopel, is in Washington for us now. John.
Well, these are the 400 pages of the report, and they're genuinely a page-turner, detailing, as it does, how Donald Trump tried to have Robert Mueller fired so that there would never be this report seeing the light of day. But will it change anyone's minds? I think those who think that Donald Trump is unfit to be president will be kind of reaffirmed in that particular view, having read the report. And those who think that Donald Trump is doing a good job and that this was a hoax and a witch hunt will take solace from the fact that the Attorney General says no laws were broken. My report, I should warn you, contains very strong language. A watershed moment for this president, and maybe the presidency itself. Donald Trump was at the White House meeting wounded warriors today, but from his 2-year-long battle with Robert Mueller, he feels he's emerged unscathed, his reputation intact. He said his guests were having a good time.
I'm having a good day too. It was called No Collusion, No Obstruction.
Before publication of this long-awaited report, the president tweeted this with its Game of Thrones styling. And his team, confident, putting out this video.
No collusion. There was no collusion. No collusion.
The 400-page report is riveting and dramatic. It describes the fallout from the firing of the FBI director, James Comey. The then Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, goes in to see the president to tell him that he's decided to appoint a special counsel to investigate Russian collusion and obstruction of justice. Donald Trump is furious and uses very strong language. According to the Mueller report, the president slumped back in his chair and said, "Oh my God, this is terrible. This is the end of my presidency. I'm fucked. This is the worst thing that ever happened to me." The report conveys a picture of a White House in total meltdown, with the president angrily demanding that Robert Mueller be fired. Don McGahn, who was then the general counsel, is repeatedly told to arrange for Mueller to be sacked. McGahn refuses. Of the president's attempts at influence, the Mueller report says they were mostly unsuccessful, but that is largely because the persons who surrounded the president declined to carry out orders or accede to his requests. The new Attorney General has weighed in sympathetically, almost saying the president's behaviour was justified.
As the special counsel's report acknowledges, there is substantial evidence to show that the president was frustrated and angered by his sincere belief that the investigation was undermining his presidency, propelled by his political opponents, and fueled by illegal leaks.
On the other question of whether there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, a clean bill of health. The Mueller report is being devoured on Capitol Hill, debated online. Democrats aren't buying the line that the president did nothing wrong.
Even in its incomplete form, however, the Mueller report, incomplete because part of it is redacted, even in its incomplete form, however, the Mueller report outlines disturbing evidence that President Trump engaged in obstruction of justice and other misconduct.
Donald Trump has left Washington to travel to Florida for the Easter weekend. His aides say he's jacked, happy, pumped up. His Good Thursday before Good Friday. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
Well, we'll get more from the White House in a moment, but first let's speak to our Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg. And the report was very clear that there had been Russian involvement in the elections. What response has there been from Moscow?
Well, tonight, a stern-faced announcer on Russian TV tried to dismiss 400 pages of Robert Mueller with one sentence. She said, 2 years and tens of millions of dollars wasted. That's how she summed up the Mueller report. I wasn't surprised because for 2 years, Russian officials have battered away every accusation, every piece of evidence that Moscow meddled in the 2016 US election. And we heard Vladimir Putin's spokesman doing the same today. Of the Mueller report, he said, this is not an object of interest for us. We will flick through it and see if there's anything worthy of analysis. So pretty dismissive, but pretty damning was the conclusion of Robert Mueller about Russia's sweeping interference in the US election. You know, Russia had high hopes for Donald Trump, and in 2016, many here hoped that he would transform US-Russian relations, and many still hope he can. But that, I think, is wishful thinking, because the contents of the Mueller report will affect US-Russian relations for a long time to come.
And John, Donald Trump's legal team is calling this report a total victory. Is it?
Well, in their mind, yes, it is, because there's no collusion. That's clear from the report. And the Attorney General says there is no need to prosecute over obstruction of justice. But Democrats will say there are still many, many more questions that need to be answered. They will be subpoenaing people, calling for papers and documents to be submitted to them as part of their investigation. They'll also want to talk to Robert Mueller, and he faces some tough questions. He said the written answers he got from Donald Trump were inadequate. Well, if that was the case, why didn't Mr. Mueller subpoena the president to come and give evidence directly? So they'll want to know about that as well. Now, Mueller points out in the report 10 occasions where he says there could have been obstruction of justice by the president, and details each one individually. But just imagine for a minute, Sophie, that the Donald Trump staff had obeyed the orders that he barked out to them, that they should fire Robert Mueller. It's arguable that the actions of Donald Trump's aides have saved Donald Trump from himself, because if they'd carried out his orders, there may well be a genuine case for obstruction of justice.
John Sopel in Washington, Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. Thank you both.